and also lived in different environment during a significant part of their childhood development years. TCKs typically develop a sense of relationship to multiple cultures without having full ownership of any. These might include missionary kids, military kids, diplomatic kids, business kids, and many others. That's just to name a few. So for me personally, I am a TCK because I lived in the Philippines from ages 2 to 11. My parents worked at a school there that trained pastors from around Asia to go back to their countries to be pastors. So I grew up around people from all different races and all different nationalities. And it really was, for me, an amazing experience. So today specifically, we will talk about TCKs and identity. I don't know about y'all, but for me, knowing and finding my identity was and still is very much a struggle. I feel like no matter where I go, I don't really fit in. I always joke around and say I have an identity crisis, but in all reality, this is true for me and for many of my TCK friends. Today, we will have Corey speak on TCK and identity. Corey is a missionary kid, or also known as an MK, from Nairobi, Kenya. After graduating from John Brown University in 2015, she spent 4 years working for JBU's study abroad program in Belfast, Northern Ireland. She also earned a Master's of Theology from Queen's University, Belfast in 2018. Now she's working in Orlando, mentoring TCKs through MK to MK, a program that works specifically with missionary kids. And if you remember from yesterday, this is also the program that Jeremiah works with. So Corey, you can start whenever you're ready.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Hello, everyone. All right, I'm just going to share my screen with you all. So some of this will be a bit of a recap, even just from Elizabeth's reintroduction, but I think we'll go through it anyway. Some of this will be very familiar to some of you, and then some of it might be a bit new. So if I was going to ask you where you would say home is and why and where you belong there, what would you say? For me, most people assume that I'm an American or a United Statesian because of my accent, which is a pretty reasonable assumption. And when I would be in the States visiting in the summers as a kid, and I would do something a little strange, like get excited about seeing a squirrel or something that was very normal to most Americans. And the kids would ask me, where are you from? And I would say, oh, I'm from Kenya. And they would say, Kenya? Isn't that in Africa? Why are you white? And when I would be in Kenya and somebody would ask me, where are you from? I would say, oh, I'm from Kenya. I was born in Nairobi Hospital. And they'd say, yeah, but where are your parents from? So I'd say, well, my parents are from the US and my dad is from Texas. My mom is from Iowa, but I've never lived in either of those places. I wasn't Kenyan enough to be Kenyan, and I wasn't American enough to be American. I didn't really seem to fit anywhere. So as we've already mentioned, today we're going to talk about TCKs, third culture kids. I'm going to look a bit at the background of where that term came from. I think this will be a recap for you again. And then just a bit of my experience, some lighthearted stories from my childhood to give you a picture of that, and then talk about how the third culture kid framework has helped me navigate my identity and grow as an individual. Apologies beforehand for using the word TCK framework multiple times. You can keep track if you want to. So there are I've got a few pictures just for interest. You can admire my fashion sense as a kid. It's pretty incredible. So just to recap, third culture kids. So a person who's spent a significant part of their childhood, their developmental years outside of their passport country. So this could be multiple places. It could be just one other place like me. And we often have more in common with each other than we do with any one place. So the third culture kid it's not a mix of those cultures, but it's rather this in-between space that we occupy. Yeah, so we have a couple commonalities. Not every TCK experiences these things. In fact, one of the interesting things about us is that we have a very broad level of experiences and different experiences. But these are some of the more common things that we experience. So one, we all have cross-cultural childhoods of some sort, and we live in a highly mobile world. So either we come back and forth from a host country to a passport country, or we maybe move a lot as a kid. Some of us have gone to boarding schools, or some of us live in communities where a lot of the people around us move pretty frequently and leave and come. So this results in a couple more commonalities between us. Most of us are expected to go back to our passport countries at some point, either for work or school. And often we can't remain in our host country, either because our parents move again or because our visas expire when we're no longer dependents. There's often distinct differences between us and our host culture. Again, not all TCKs are like this, but many of us stand out where we grew up. Some of us have pretty privileged lifestyles compared to the people around us. Either there's perks because our family works with a certain company, we get to travel some, and often, depending on where you live in the world, you might be a little bit more economically comfortable than the majority of people around you. And lastly, a lot of us are part of a bigger system identity. So maybe that's your parents are business people and they're with a certain company, or as in my case, my parents were missionaries, or your parents are with the military. So those are just a few of the things that might be common in a third culture kid's experience. So here are just a few more pictures. I'm going to share a little bit about my experiences and just some funny stories to kind of illustrate what my experience was like. And then I'll talk about how the third culture kid framework was helpful for me. When I say TCK framework, it just means it's more than just the definition, but it's this breadth of research that even looks at how we cope with transitions, how we different struggles we might face, and some helpful ways to address that. But because of time today, I'm not going to look at all those things. But there's plenty of podcasts and TED Talks about third culture kids that are really well done that you could look up for yourself. So I definitely stood out in Kenya, and people stared at us pretty frequently. There was no hiding. We looked different. I would be sitting in Sunday school sometimes, and the kids behind me would play with my hair because it was just different than everybody else's. And I remember this one time we were going out to see a football match, or a soccer game, as they call it in the States. And out at Kasarani Stadium, we were seeing the Harambee Stars, Kenya's national football team, play. And the next day, my dad kept getting texts from people saying, "Hey, we saw you." And so we asked, "What do you mean you saw us?" And they said, "Oh, look in the paper." So we turned to the sports section of the Sunday paper that day, and there was a full color, pretty large photograph of my family in the stands with the caption, "Some supporters out for the match." There was no hiding, and often people drew attention to us because we just looked different. We would go back and forth between the US about every 3 years. And one summer we were visiting my aunties in Texas, and I went to the toilet and I didn't flush because Kenya was in the middle of a pretty bad drought. And so we were being very careful with water. And one of the ways we did that was by not flushing the toilet every time. And my cousin, who was a few years older than me, walked by a few minutes later and she said, "Ew, somebody didn't flush the toilet." And I was so mortified. I, of course, did not admit that it was me. But I thought, I don't know what the rules are here. Something's different. I thought I knew what I was supposed to do, but there's something different going on in this place. In Kenya, we were really careful with water, and we washed vegetables in clean water before eating them. We composted. We ate mangoes and greeted people with a handshake or with a double kiss or with a proper hug. None of this side hug business. And there were no seasons. There was only rainy and dry. We lived on the equator, and sunset only varied by a few minutes. I knew that when the first rains came, I needed to close my windows because of flying termites, which, by the way, are pretty delicious if you fry them in a little butter. They taste kind of like popcorn. So life there was just very different, and the rhythms and norms uh, were different than the States. We danced in church, we laid hands on people, and we had chai and mandazi afterwards. And I loved the people I knew there and my friends and my family. And I'm sure you all have memories of homes that you've had and places that you've loved and the norms and rhythms that are associated with those places. I moved to the States when I was 14. It was a pretty sudden and traumatic move. We didn't know that we were moving before we weren't planning on moving. My parents told us 2 months before we left Kenya that we were going to the States. And there were lots of new things that I had to navigate. I remember having a bit of a existential crisis when I kept spelling the word color in class with a U, um, and it got marked wrong. And only later did I realize, oh, American spellings and British spellings are different. I'd use Swahili words that I just thought were the word for the thing, and people wouldn't understand what I was talking about. I'd sit too close to people, and I would cross the street at just anywhere. I didn't understand what jaywalking was or why it was a problem. I struggled to keep up in conversations with uh, my peers because they'd use American slang or idioms or um, pop culture references that I didn't know. And it was hard to explain to people why I didn't understand what was going on when I looked and I sounded like I did. I didn't have the language to describe my experience, and that was pretty rough as a teenager. I felt like I was failing or that there was something wrong with me. So some of you are familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and this includes things like shelter, food, safety. So it's about these things that we need to flourish, to live healthily as humans, kind of our basic needs. And belonging is included in his list because it's part of how we form healthy relationships and feel grounded as human beings and can grow in our identity and um, confidence. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about my experience, how the TCK framework has been helpful to me. I first heard the term third culture kids when I was 14 and moved to the States. And it suddenly helped me make sense of why I didn't feel like I belonged anywhere. Belonging for me had always felt like this distant horizon, this thing that I could never quite reach. And it was hard to figure out how do I explain home to people who don't understand my background. So the TCK framework has done two major things for me. It's helped normalize my experience and help me know that I'm not alone. So there's other people like me who live between worlds. And two, it's just given me the language and the tools to describe my experience so that I can grow in my identity and my health as an individual. So um, basically the language and the frameworks I'd been given to describe what belonging meant or what identity meant didn't really fit my experience, and I just ended up dealing with these sort of internal conflicts and feeling like, again, thinking that there was something very wrong with me. So realizing that my experiences were normal helped me release the lie that I wasn't enough and the unrealistic expectations I had for belonging. Hearing that other TCKs and MKs thought that they needed to be perfect to protect their parents' jobs and acceptance in their community helped me acknowledge the pressure I felt to be perfect and release the lie that my belonging was contingent upon my experience. I often felt guilty or some shame about struggling with things as a kid, feeling lonely, feeling sad that I lost places and people, because I really loved my childhood and I was pretty aware that I was pretty lucky compared to a lot of the people I knew and lived around. But ignoring those losses hindered my ability to grow. So the TCK framework gave me permission to name those losses and grieve while also looking realistically at transition and how to transition well. So identity formation and processing grief are human skills. They're not just TCK ones. But the framework gave me the tools and the language for navigating and responding to my specific experiences as a cross-cultural, highly mobile kid. And being able to do that and sort of move on from this place I was stuck in and just going around and around and around has allowed me to lean into the more difficult realities about life and the complexity of other people's lives and stories. It helped me start to listen to other people. Like a lot of third culture kids, I lived a privileged life. I got to travel. Our economic comfort was greater than a lot of Kenyans, and we definitely benefited from white privilege. I've often wondered how I can talk about Kenya as a home when I didn't experience Kenya like most Kenyans did. To talk about my childhood is to acknowledge the ways that my life benefited from inequality and just the arbitrariness of being born into a Western family with easy access to education and a support system. As I'm dealing with these questions, I'm reminded that identity formation is an ongoing process. It's okay for me to take up space and tell my story, but it's not okay for me to avoid other people's stories or realities. We're having important conversations about justice and listening to other people when they say their realities are different from ours. And I need to lean into these conversations and continue learning. We're all constantly changing and growing and renegotiating our identity and relationships with places and people, all of us, not just third culture kids. And that's a good thing. Growth requires curiosity and a healthy relationship with the unknown. In this sense, I think the third culture kid framework has helped me to embrace paradox and complexity in life. The paradox of people's lives and identities that are outside of boxes. Being from the States or being from Kenya aren't all one thing either. I love the States because it's a place with people from everywhere and multiple expressions of what it means to be an American. Kenya also has 42 different people groups, each with their own language, and there are several different religions practiced in Kenya. And to embrace the paradox of the Christian gospel. Jesus, who is man and God, a God who is just and merciful, full of loving compassion, infinitely wise, who is totally other from us and yet also near and present with us in our lives. Those things are held in tension and balance, just like my identity or relationship with place. After listening to my story, a non-TCK friend asked me the other day what it would take for me to say I was from a place without feeling like I'm lying. I told her I didn't think I'd ever be able to do that, but that isn't my goal anymore. I'm glad I can understand my story and previous expectations for belonging, even though I might not fully be at home in any one place. I'm at home in Kenya and the US, in Belfast, and in an airport, or with the people I love. So the third culture kid framework for me has been a helpful tool to release unhelpful ideas of what belonging is, as well as embracing paradox in life, to carry and hold tension, to embrace the people and places I'm in while missing others, and to allow myself to be at home in many places, if never one, as well as approaching others and myself with better curiosity and compassion. Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you, Corey, so much for sharing with us. I completely relate to so much of what you said. And I think sometimes as TCKs, I feel like people expect us to choose an identity or choose a place. But I guess kind of what I've come to the terms to is that I can be like, I can embrace the Asian part of me as much as I can embrace the American part of me. Like, you know, I don't have to choose, although I feel like some people don't like that we can't choose, you know. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is just like yesterday, we're going to do an interview. So today we will be interviewing Christina and V. So I would like you guys to introduce yourselves, where are you living currently, and what makes you a TCK.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Christina. Right now, I'm living in Boston, and then I'm a researcher at a pharmaceutical company. And then I was born in China originally, and then I moved to New Zealand when I was at the age of 12, and then I moved to the States for college and working now.
Awesome.
Guys, my name is Viranya. I'm currently in North Carolina, USA. I'm on staff with Bridges. And what makes me a TCK is that I was born in Thailand, which is my dad's country. And I grew up in Indonesia, which is where my mom is from.
Awesome. Cool. So the first question I have for you guys is, when did you understand that you had a culture different from the rest of society or didn't really fit into society's box?
I think that's a good question. I think for me, even when I was in China, I think I had a feeling of different from other people around me, because even when I was in China, I moved around in different cities. And then so I was born in the south of China, in the Kendong province. And then and then I moved to Shanghai when I was little. And then so I grew up in Shanghai for several years. And then one day, for 1 year in elementary school, I moved back to Kendong. And then just having the move made me feel, I guess I felt different, as I feel like I didn't fit in, because they speak different dialects. And then also they have, I guess like the culture of different cities can be very different as well. And then so it just like being in different cities can even be hard. And then when I moved to New Zealand, I also had a culture difference, and then also the language barrier when I first moved to New Zealand. And then so being there, I think one thing that helped me a lot was that a lot of people around me when I was in New Zealand were also people of different culture. And I think being with people of different culture really helped me realize that, kind of like helped me to fitting in. But it's just being in different places where people grew up differently from me kind of helped me hard to fit into the community.
Yeah, I can relate to some of that, Christina. I can't think of like the first time, when I realized I was different, but there were a few moments. For example, in Thailand, whenever I talk to people and then I later on say, I actually don't speak Thai fluently, before we get into like really deep conversation and it's really awkward. And I could just see it on their forehead, like, you are not Thai because you don't speak Thai fluently. And in Indonesia, as you can read my name on the screen, my name is a Thai name. And so whenever I introduce myself to people, they will know that I'm not from there, even though my mom is from there. And people would always ask me all things about Thailand. And I would be like, what is so special about Thailand? But that's, the kind of things people would talk to me about. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. So the next question I have is, how do you identify yourself currently? And if that is different from the past, how has that changed over time?
Yeah, I think for me, it's mostly depending on who I'm talking with. If I'm talking with people from China, I would mostly identify myself as Chinese. Or if I'm talking to someone from New Zealand, I would say, oh, I'm also from New Zealand. Or if I talk to someone from the States, I would say I'm from either Boston or Maine, since my parents are actually currently living in Maine. So I think, yeah, definitely depending on who I'm talking with. I guess in a way it helps me to find common grounds with the person, and then helping me to relate to the person. But if it, I guess it kind of, yeah, but if someone who's from neither of these places, I would also say I'm Chinese for the simplicity, because I look Asian, and my passport country is, where I was from is from China.
Yeah, I think that's maybe one of the advantages that TCKs do have, because I kind of have that same thing where it's like, if someone is international, I'll be like, oh yeah, like I lived in the Philippines. And if I'm just talking to American, it's like, okay, like I lived in Florida, so I definitely relate to that.
I used to wrestle a lot more with like how much more of a Thai, I was, or how much more of an Indonesian I was. But I think as I grew to be just a lot more mature, and yeah, just a lot more accepting of the idea of that I am a TCK, then I just learned to be more okay being both Thai and Indonesian and not being fully understood by people. And that, yeah, and that's, like perfectly fine that people don't fully understand me in that way. So it has changed. Now I will say I am Thai and Indonesian.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. Yeah. So the next question I have is, what major life event has shaped how you identify yourself today?
I think for me, it was after I came to know Christ, after I decided to follow Jesus. When I lived in Indonesia, that was when I started having the understanding and even a deeper peace, knowing that, again, I'll share a little bit that it's okay that I'm not fully known by people. We all desire to be fully known. But the Lord knows me fully, and He knows me more than I know myself, more than I know myself as a Thai and also an Indonesian.
Mhm.
So I think that has changed and impacted my perspective on living life as a TCK.
Yeah.
I think for me, I think the concept didn't really hit me and when I was living in New Zealand, even though I think because when I was living in New Zealand, many people that I interact with are people who also immigrated there. And then so I think the concept of TCK didn't like identity part wasn't really something that I was wrestling with until I came to the US, where I guess in the beginning when people ask me where you're from, I would say I'm from China or New Zealand. But then when people ask me more questions about New Zealand or China, I wouldn't be able to tell them in depth. And I think that was the time when I realized that, where how would I answer this question? But I think similar to V, I think God really helped me in terms of identifying where I'm from. Not like putting a statement, but rather I remember when I think the first time when I came to Vision Conference, it was in Daytona, and then there was a theme for the Vision Conference, and it was identity. I think at the time, I actually don't remember what exactly talked about during the Vision Conference, since I think it was almost 7 years ago.
Yeah.
But I think after finishing Vision Conference, it helped me to realize that my identity is made of all the different experiences that I have, and that God has granted me or given me these unique experience of being in different countries and being in different places where I'm able to, I guess, relate to different culture, even just partially, and that at the root of this identity is that I am God's children, and that I think that really helped me to see at the end of it, I guess my identity is rooted in Christ rather than a specific country. But I think all these experiences kind of make up into who I am. So I think, yeah, that God really helped me to realize who I am now. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you both for sharing. I really enjoyed hearing from you both, and some of the stuff I really related. And thank you again, Corey, for sharing with us.